it is kind of like you may not like the guy, okay? And that's how I judge a lot of skaters, right? I mean, to be honest, I hate on Evan Smith all the time because the tricks don't look very consistent. Looks like he's barely hanging on, barely got lucky. All this nollie heel back Smith, complete control, right? I spent a whole week last week talking shit on T-Funk, the guy that's always moving his arms around all crazy while doing a basic ollie or a flat ground Smith grind on a little ledge. You get Nyjah risking his fucking life, and he's doing it completely relaxed, doesn't need all this, right? Also, talk to all those other people in San Francisco that bomb hills, and they somehow do it without the fake arm stees, and then come back and talk to me. Whatever. You guys can watch this part on your own time. We'll fast forward through it.
This is an interesting photograph.
Yes. Yeah,
did we look at this last week?
Yeah, in the context of the boulder fields, not.
Oh, okay. So now we'll throw in Jeremy. Yeah, he's out there, leaping over the rocks. What we need is videos of Jeremy, because you can't. He was very great, tall, kind of graceful, and he was a good runner.
Oh, thank you, Mom.
And he had a long stride. But yeah, we're checking out the Hickory Run boulder field, composed of red stone, sandstones, and conglomerates. Very interesting. And then this one is the Blue Rocks boulder field in Pennsylvania. And so there we see Jeremy again. So these were two completely different trips here, or was it? With two completely different days, two completely different sites. And boulder fields are always interesting because their origins are not fully explained. At least the efforts to explain the origins of boulder fields using strictly gradualist or uniformitarian explanations never quite held up.
Doesn't really work.
And it's interesting because there's a stream that flows through here, but you don't see it because you can hear it.
No, it's under all the rocks.
Yeah, I would say those rocks are probably, it's a layer maybe 20 feet thick.
Woo, baby, new card.
But yeah, it's
we got a new
fun.
card.
And as we talked about last time, it's the trees are slowly encroaching upon it. And as the trees encroach upon it, they will be shedding their leaves, and then over many generations, those leaves will fill in all of the voids and spaces, and eventually the whole boulder field will be buried. More trees will grow there. You'll walk through the forest and not even know that this thing is under your feet. But see, when you walk into the forest from here, you begin to see exactly the process, because you can actually, it's almost time transgressive. You can see from bare rock, like you see here, and then as you go into the trees, the further away you get, the more progressively they get buried.
Yeah,
it makes sense?
Transition zone,
yeah. Transition zone, exactly.
Where the encroaching is happening.
Yep.
That's really cool. See that.
Yeah, and we're going to get into this.
In the archives, there's some video.
Yeah. Check this out. This is the Hickory Run.
Wow.
Now, yeah, and what's interesting to see here is because it's such a
Those are
flat
more
surface.
rounded. Yeah, those are much more rounded than those other ones.
Yes, which is an indication of the transport distance.
And all this is all the same type of rock?
No, this is the Hickory Run is a sandstone. Let's see. Redstone.
But each of these beds is essentially the same type of rock?
No, this is one type of rock.
Well, that's what I'm saying. They're two different fields with two different types of rock.
Two different types of rock.
But within each field, it's homogeneous.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So these are two examples of what are called boulder fields and or boulder streams. Whether it's a boulder stream or a boulder field depends on width to length ratio of the feature.
What's the source of these?
Well, it's in the uplands. They were washed, I would think. I mean, I don't know how else you're going to transport them, other than, if you have a
Right,
very
but I understand that. But where are they sourced? Found the source?
Yo, what's up, Moonraker? Yeah, buddy, I
yeah,
think he
I mean,
is.
within not
I think
too
he
many
is,
miles
dude.
away, there are
By Zahi Hawass.
Appalachian Mountains. So, if you have a mass wasting event, it's the only thing that makes sense. I mean, like when you read the studies on them, they're scratching their heads trying to figure out the exact mechanism. I mean, they know where it came from, but how do you get it from point A to point B and spread it out on a flat surface? Okay, so here in the Blue Ridge, let's see, this is the quartz site. Yeah, so bare stream-like accumulations of boulders along valley bottoms occur at widely
Am I streaming in the right
separated
category?
localities along the Blue
I'm not
Ridge
even
of
streaming in the right fucking
Pennsylvania to
category.
West Virginia. The
That's
boulders
hilarious.
are loosely packed, unsorted, heterogeneous
That's really funny.
in size and shape, and range up to 12 feet in length. The sound of water of running water beneath the surface is audible. And in fact, in that picture right here of Jeremy, he's actually listening, standing in that picture, listening to the running water. But that running water had nothing to do with the emplacement of this boulder field. Okay, so here we go, Mike. Here's the answer to the question. The boulders are of quartzite derived from neighboring slopes and ridges. They are now lichen covered, are undergoing disintegration in place, and show no evidence of appreciable present-day movement. The rock streams appear to be fossil forms and are best explained as a product of solifluction under paraglacial conditions in Pleistocene time. Solifluction is a type of mass wasting or mass movement. Kyle will look that up, S-O-L-I, solifluctions, and it'll give us a little more precise definition that I would give you at the time, so let's hear what that says. Paraglacial simply means near the glacier. So the idea here is you've got an environment that's not covered in glaciers, but the glaciers aren't far away. That's paraglacial, right? So they're best explained.
You liked
as a
him?
product
Yeah.
of
I don't know.
Under paraglacial conditions.
Yeah, in the 90s.
Time, with subsequent removal of
Yo, what's up, Toad? You following?
material
Nice, man.
by running water.
Nice, man. Hell yeah.
This
Legend.
explanation applies also to the boulder-choked valleys and subdued, overgrown talus slopes, which are more
Legend.
widespread in the area. That's just what I was talking about. There are lots of these things around, but because, as it says there, they're overgrown. So because they're overgrown, people aren't aware of that a lot of this stuff is underfoot. And that's a big part of, trying to teach people this stuff, is because a lot of the evidence is obscured now. But it's all around us, and in this case, you might be walking on a trail in the forest and not understand the nature of the landscape under your feet. And what'd you find for solifluction there, Kyle?
It says the gradual movement of wet soil or other material down a slope, especially where frozen subsoil acts as a barrier to the percolation of water.
There we go.
It's already way better in
frozen
Ottawa.
subsoil allows the saturation. But then if it melts, say it gets warm enough, then
It's already way better in Ottawa. I gotta be the first follow. I gotta be the
really
first
almost like
Toad
a
follower.
slow
Dang, I
mudslide.
can't miss that opportunity.
right? Although in this case, I would argue that it's not really actual solifluction the way you described it, because I would say the emplacement was much more rapid. And one of the things that might have been going on is that during the deglaciation, you not only have the rapid saturation of the soil, right?
Is that you?
You've got to
It's gotta be you.
somehow see. Here's part of the problem. It's one thing to have
They fucking
saturated
copied
soil, but how do
Twitch.
you get it loaded with these
like, literally-
millions of boulders?
Yeah, it says
You
it's
followed
a
me.
relatively
Six-
rapid
thanks,
process
homie.
in
It's like they
paraglacial
literally
conditions
copied everything from
resulting in
Twitch.
active development of
It's
soil.
hilarious.
Yeah. And
The
you know
user
what?
interface is such a
That-
rip-off.
That interpretation of it there probably
Such a
stems
huge fucking
directly
rip-off.
from the study of boulder fields, like we're looking at here.
Wait, Twitch source code
But so,
2018
see,
or
then
something.
this explanation applies
Dang.
also to the boulder choke
It does look.
valleys,
Yeah,
and
dang,
overgrown
man.
talus slopes, which are
Is
more
it not
widespread in the
copyrighted?
area.
Like, what the fuck, man?
And then the previous sentence, subsequent removal of interstitial material. So picture you've got a mud flow,
That sucks, man.
a very
Oh, that's actually
fluidized
great.
mud flow, choked with all of these bold
Turn the purple neon.
spreading out onto the valley floor from the
I know, right?
adjacent uplands and ridges and slopes. Spreads out. Okay, so now it's in place. Once that event is over, it now,
Thanks for following
because
me.
this event was on a scale beyond what would normally be
I see XQC is there.
effective erosion or deposition.
They
at
have
the
fucking
big
streamers
area.
with thousands
So
of viewers.
because of the scale and magnitude of it, once it's over, it's pretty much left in
Dirty
place.
sounds nice, man.
You know, so now the running water, what it does, it doesn't really move the boulders, but it begins to wash out the material, the mud that these boulders would have been encased within. Does that make sense? And particularly if you have storms, you
Hell
have
yeah,
a
bro.
lot of extra runoff, it's going to wash the mud out. But you're looking here basically at two very
Hell yeah,
distinct
man.
regimes of deposition and erosion. The erosion that would take out, wash away
No,
the
man, I hope
fine-grained
not.
soil.
It's supposed to be
Between the
ASMR.
rocks.
It's supposed to be a
It's a whole
relaxing
different
thing.
order of magnitude than the depositional event that put those rocks there in the first place. That makes sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Have you seen? I don't want to get too far off the main topic here, but have you seen Black Mountain in Australia? That's actually a pile of boulders, a mountain-sized pile of gigantic boulders. And I've always wondered what geological process could have. Well, maybe we can look at that sometime.
Sure.
Yeah, I thought of the same thing the last time we were looking at the
I
boulder
mean,
field.
it's literally a mountain made of boulders, of gigantic black rocks.
So you got to, first of all, in a case like this, try to begin to, you know, if you're going to try to explain the whole process, you got to explain, okay, how do you get so many pieces of broken rock?
Right.
You know, what's the story there? You get all of these pieces of broken rock, you know, millions. And then
Yeah,
he goes on,
That's the first question I would ask. What broke the rock up? Where does the broken rock come from?
well, this particular geologist, in the conclusion of his
I hope
paper,
not,
says
man.
that the tumultuous appearance,
I
and if you look at it, yeah, it's not moving,
succeed
but it still has what
with
he's
health.
describing as a tumultuous appearance of the surface suggests, and this is a key phrase right here, arrested motion after forcible movement, somewhat in the fashion of an ice jam in a river. So you've got this process. It's a forcible movement in placing, somehow extracting these boulders from the ridge tops and the slopes, transporting, conveying them down onto the valley floor, and then spreading them out on the flat valley floor, so that the whole valley floor is basically mantled with these rocks that came down. So it seems, one, you need saturation.
Nice drugs,
But
thanks.
it's the
I'm sorry for
saturation
people that are
that
dry
you
in the
have
chat. I really am.
to
I just want to share the
supercharge
wealth, you know?
this matrix of
Not
mud
literally, but I
material
mean in
with all
terms
of these
of.
broken rocks.
I mean, I do
So I
literally.
think with
Fuck
Mike,
the
the
police.
question is how do you break up all these thousands upon thousands of rocks in the first place? And I would
99
suggest
sounds. They're
that the
disposal for
saturation
1 USD. I like it, buddy.
is being accompanied by
Sounds
perhaps
nice, man.
shaking seismic events in the region, most likely due to deglaciation, which is also related to why you're having this super saturated soil in the area. And one of the things interesting about the Hickory Run is, like, you'll notice here that as you go from the top end of the flow to the bottom end, the rocks, this is the top end of the flow. Look at how sharp and jagged the rocks are
Drugs,
here
thanks, man.
compared to when you get a couple of, 300-400 yards farther down. All right, so here's the upper end of the boulder field, and there's further down, maybe 300-400 yards farther down, and as you get to the lower end,
Weed is now
you see that
cheaper
the rocks
than
are rounder and
like
smooth.
steak in Canada.
And so I think right there, that's direct indication of transport. It could also be used as a so-called paleo-current indicator.
Like a 28.
Because in this case,
No, that's not
it's gonna
true.
be flowing from,
Sorry, I was thinking grams and ounces. That's not
obviously,
true at
you've
all.
got this
Meat is still way less
layer there,
expensive.
and you have evidence that
I was
this
thinking
layer
ounces, like.
was not transported as far
Never
as
mind.
this layer.
I was wrong. That's not
It would
accurate at all.
suggest that the flow is, from the sharp
I'm
angle
sharing that right
rocks
now. Oh wow.
towards the more
Cool,
rounded
man. That's cool, dude.
rock.
I just get. Oh, sorry. I'm really sorry about that.
Because they got
I just get really. I get
transported
too
farther.
hungry, man.
So
I get fucking really hungry.
with that kind of evidence, you can determine which way the flow was.
I would be interested.
Meat
to
is
know
eggs.
also,
Oh yeah, that'll help a
if
lot.
possible to figure this
That'll
out,
help
how
fucking-
fast is the
help a lot.
boundary of trees encroaching? And
Cool, bro.
could you then, reverse engineer that and figure out how long it would take for this boulder field to be completely covered? And then maybe you could use that as an estimate for how old it is.
Well, yes, and in fact, if we go on here without, I mean, this is something I wanted to be covering soon anyway.
Okay.
But
That's
here,
cool,
this
man.
is Appalachian Mountains and Plateaus, vast areas covered by bouldery, generally unsorted and unstratified debris, lie along mountain foot slopes in many parts of the Blue Ridge. The origin of these foot slope deposits has been considered problematic. Study of modern debris slides in this region, however, makes these deposits somewhat more understandable. But then when we look at the next slide here, now this is typical. Of course, they're much smaller, which would imply a less vigorous flow of smaller magnitude than what emplaced either the blue rocks or ringing rocks in the hickory rock boulder fields. But this is very, very typical of the stream bottoms of all throughout the Appalachians. Right? Now, if you go, here's where this is the Pigeon River flowing through. It's at the foot of Cold Mountain, the fairly famous Cold Mountain that the novel and the book was written around, the Civil War epic. Anatomy of a valley floor. Boulder cobble layer is superimposed on a scoured bedrock floor, and there's an immature soil horizon capping the boulder bed. And let's see, I should have, right here, scoured bedrock here. There we go. So that's actually bedrock right there. So it gives you an idea of the thickness of this boulder cobble layer. It's about 4 or 5 feet thick, and it's laid out over a bedrock floor, right? If we look at the next one here, you can see for scale, actually there's Jeremy again.
There's Jeremy.
We're out there collecting rocks for his rock shaping craft. That's what we're actually doing there. But I'm also, checking out the geology. So we have right here an exposed bedrock of a metamorphosed gneiss, right? So you got to picture this. This whole entire valley floor is mantled with this 5, 6, 7, 8 foot layer of cobbles and gravel and boulders.
And it's a scoured bedrock, which means something washed whatever was there away and replaced it with this cobble.
Mike got it, nailed it. Right, that's exactly right, Mike. Okay, so right there, Mike, you've justified your existence for at least another 2 or 3 episodes. Excellent insight, Mike. Yes, that was what I was going to see. I was going to see if Kyle actually was putting that together. But you beat it.
I was
to the
just
punch.
thinking of the word nice.
Nice.
So right there, you see that arrow? That's pointing. That's a metamorphosed gneiss, and that is the bedrock, right? So you've got this layer, just like Mike said. You had to have a scoured surface first that exposed the bedrock, and then you had to have the deposition of the cobble, boulder, gravel layer, and then you have topsoil forming on that. Now let's see if we have here. If you look, you'll see over here on the left, you'll see this layer of topsoil. It's about a foot thick. Well, I did some research. In this environment of western North Carolina, under normal gradualistic circumstances, you can assume about a 1-inch thick layer of topsoil every 1,000 years.
So let me guess, it's 12 inches thick.
It's about a foot, maybe 16
There
inches.
you go.
in place. Yeah.
Mike's nailing it. On fire tonight, Mike.
He is on, the man is on fire. He is. I mean, look, I've seen this before in Mike. So check out over here on the right. You'll see that you've got this, the topsoil is very distinct from the underlying cobbles. And if we went over to the tree line and started digging down, we would find the same valley floor. And in fact, I would say that there was a time, if we had a time machine and we could go back 12 or 13,000 years, to the right day, the right month or so, time of year, whatever, the right year, what we would see is a vast valley floor just basically covered in this stuff right here. And what the whole floor would look like is what you kind of are seeing right here. You get it? So
Yeah.
how do you get that as the end result without having some kind of a extreme erosional event followed by an extreme depositional event? And then once those are over, not much happens because now it's a fossil feature. So in other words, the whole valley floor here is a fossil.
And you say this is predominant pretty much in West North Carolina, up along the Appalachians?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Absolutely it is.
I mean, we have this here too.
Yeah.
Kyle and I've noticed. We've walked many stream beds, and there's a little bitty creek, but there's this enormous cobble/boulder field all around it.
Yep.
And then you can see up farther up, you start to get thin topsoil.
Right.
And it's become clear to us looking at that stuff now, and you can also find places like that where you're pointing out where the exposed bedrock is, and it's clearly it's limestone in our case, and it's clearly been scoured by water.
Right.
Right. So yeah, it's become clear to us that a lot of water moved through these areas.
Yes.
Very quickly, carrying a whole bunch of crap that they later dropped.
You got to what you actually have to understand is what you're seeing here is the aftermath of highly erosive floods,
Right.
flushing these valleys out, scouring right down to the bare bedrock. So whatever was there before is now gone.
Yeah.
Then, as the floods decline, the same flowing water that scoured the valley floor now drops its cargo of huge amounts of broken rock that's being rolled and transported in this flood, mantles the valley floor with it. It's over, and now it sits there for 10, 12, 13,000, 14,000 years, whatever the length of time.
Right.
And the normal processes come in and slowly begin to conceal it. See, that's the thing, is that the modern processes are slowly destroying these fossil features, but so slowly that, yeah, after 10 or 12 or 15,000 years, they're still here. Now, how many people do you think will drive through this valley, see this, and never even have the slightest thought of what the story that's being told here by what you see?
Right.
Probably just about nobody. Interestingly, the time...
Everyone who watches this show. Everyone who watches this show.
Well, everyone who watches this show, yes.
That's what I'm saying. That's what this
right.
show is for, is to teach people how to be able to drive through valleys like this and see the thousands of years of geological story. in these
Exactly.
features.
Creating context so they can
Right.
recognize it.
Right. So, again, this would be going back to our little metaphor of fingerprints and footprints. This is kind of a footprint, although it's not an obvious one. It's not like a meteor crater or an extinct cataract, but of course a lot of people might look at an extinct cataract and not know it's an extinct cataract. See, we have extinct cataracts all over the southern Appalachians, but you know, they're generally so overgrown, and most people it's just a big amphitheater with a little waterfall going over it. And the amphitheater is 100 times bigger than the modern waterfall. Who stops to think about the fact that the amphitheater was originally created by a flow that might have been 100 or 1,000 times greater than the modern floods that are running through that particular valley? But that's what we're looking at. So then this was another study. Now I was studying all this. This goes back to the 80s. So me and Jeremy are out there studying this stuff in the 80s, going out and I met Jeremy in 89, I think. So this is 89, 90, 91, 92 right there. But a lot of the studies that I had already been looking into, I'd already done some of the studies. So that's how I knew, okay, we're going to go up here to Gold Mountain. I know that there's bedrock and ice up there, and we're going to go up there and check this out. So one of the studies I read was this David Scott Schaefer. This was from his unpublished master's thesis at the University of Tennessee, published in 1984, Lake Quaternary, Paleoecologic, Geomorphic, and Paleoclimatic History of Flat Laurel Gap, Blue Ridge Mountains, North Carolina. And he says that the widespread existence of relic meaning that it's a relic of the past. Relic talus, block streams, and block fields, and colluvial fans that date from the late Pleistocene and early Holocene. So we're talking right there in that transition, right there. That's pinpointing us right back to the younger Dryas era, right? Is evidence of a former severe paraglacial environment characterized by intense freeze-thaw processes in and around Flat Laurel Gap during the full and late glacial. So one of the things about the paraglacial processes is when we're talking about the creation of these boulders originally from what would have been a solid continuous mass of bedrock, that's where we can get into the idea of might freeze thaw. So when you have intense paraglacial, what you're doing is you've got very intense cold, and then that's followed by a warming, a seasonal warming, and then intense cold. So you've got this freeze thaw cycle. That can actually go to work on the bedrock. I still would think, though, that a seismic event is going to be necessary for a full explanation of, I don't think, you see, because of the fact that when we look at the Hickory Run boulder field, for example, it's all transport. Paraglacial phenomena, while it can fracture rock, it tends to leave it in the same place, right? So it's still interesting to try to resolve it. It hasn't been resolved yet. What we're seeing here is just one little regional expression of this evidence that there was something that happened that was another order of magnitude. And the last date that I had up there was putting it right back there in that window. They were using, we'll be coming back to this stuff, but it was talking about thermoluminescence dating, putting it right back to the terminal ice age period. And so what we've been looking at all of these episodes is evidence of fingerprints of some kind of a cosmic event, right? So I want to get to where we kind of have an understanding of both of these things. That yes, there was an event that left this impression in the ice, in the lake deposits, in peat bogs, etc. But then this event had outward manifestations in all of these varied forms. What we just looked at was one of those forms. We just saw evidence that there was something that happened. So the question, and as Mike saw instantly, we're talking about flushing the valley. We're talking about washing in huge amounts of rock and boulders, depositing it, and then leaving it sit there for 10 or 12 or 15,000 years, whatever, forming a soil over it. So now people go, they build roads, they build their houses on it, trees are growing. Nobody suspects that if you went back in a time machine not that long ago, it would look completely different, right? So what we're trying to do is go, something very unique happened here, right? It left its signature in the landscape in this form that we just looked at. Now, it does appear that at the same time, something else happened. Around large sections of the world, we have deposition of microspherules that only form under high temperature. And we have nanodiamonds, and we have iridium and platinum showing up. We have fullerenes, we have melt glass that's showing up. So the question is how do we connect all of this together? And is there a connection? Would a flood of such outsized scale and magnitude as must have done its handiwork, its geomorphic handiwork in this valley that we were just looking here, the valley of the Pigeon River, was that event connected somehow to the deposition of nanodiamonds and microspherules and melt glass? That's kind of where I want people to be thinking about this. So this is the famous meteor crater in Arizona. I got approximately 26,000 years old here. I don't know if that's correct. Most of the estimates I've seen are 40 to 50,000 years. I think there have been some studies suggesting it's a little younger, though, like with the age I've got here. The age is not so important right now. The main thing is to understand is that this was created by the impact of an iron object. So interestingly, it was about the same size as the Tunguska object. So it kind of gives us a means of comparison. And of course, the difference being the much greater density of the meteor crater in Arizona. That meteorite is why it hit the ground and created this hole in the ground that's just obvious to anybody, and why Tunguska did not create a hole in the ground like this. So estimates here were about 20 megatons. So given that the estimate for the Tunguska, I used 15 megatons because that's the one usually cited, but there have been estimates up to 30 megatons for the total energy released by the Tunguska event. I think most of the estimates that I've seen range from around 12 to up to 30 megatons. I kind of stayed the more conservative side, which is 15 megatons, which I think is closer to the majority of the estimates, but certainly it gives some idea, it gives one the idea of the destructions involved. So we're going to just run through here looking at just a gallery of some various impact craters, along with some sense of the energies released. So Lonar, India has a lake in it, about 500,000 years old. It's 1.1 miles in diameter, so that's certainly bigger than the meteor crater, which was the one we just looked at, which is 3/5 of a mile in diameter. So this is just roughly about twice the diameter. And I've got there 20 megatons, which is actually on the conservative side. It might be closer to 25 or even 30 megatons. That happens to be about roughly 1,400 Hiroshima-sized atomic bombs exploding at once, just to give you some sense of the power. This is in Ontario, Holaford crater. Now this one is very obscure. It's almost more of an astrobleed than a crater, because it's definitely a scar, but it's healed a long ways because it's obviously become eroded, infilled with sediment. But you can certainly see the circularity of it. And it's a very old one, so that's consistent with its degree of erosion. As it says here, diameter 1.46 miles. At that point, the explosive energy is about 42 megatons. So now we're getting up into the range of Sarbamba, which I remember I said was 55 megatons, which was the largest hydrogen nuclear bomb ever tested during the Cold War by the Soviet Union, which was more than 3 times the power of Bravo, which was the U.S.'s largest hydrogen bomb. 2,800 Hiroshima-sized atomic bombs exploding at once. Australia, this is a really old one, diameter about 2 miles. So this is like, again, a scar, an impact scar, an astrobleed. Astrobleed literally translates as star wound. So we're up to about 125 megatons for one that size. The BP structure in Libya, which is about 120 million years old, it's almost 2 miles in diameter, so it's going to be about 125 megatons, right in that range. Some of these are old. Here's a better shot of the same BP structure, maybe with some recalculations, because probably the other one was an older version, because I've been putting these things together maybe for 25 years. So sometimes I update them, and then other times I don't update them, and some of the information may have become dated in the process because but the point here is not the precise details of this, but in this case what we're looking at is to try to get a general concept of the energies involved. I've always been fond of this. Steinem Basin in Germany, about 14.8 million years old, 2 miles in diameter. There's actually 2 villages built right inside the crater. And notice the flatness of it in the farmland, which shows that the crater has been infilled with a lot of sediment. So this would have been roughly about 8,000 Hiroshima bombs exploding at one time. We come up Brent Crater in central Ontario, also about 2 miles in diameter. Now, a lot of craters in Canada, and I think one reason for that is that because of the successive glaciations over Canada, a lot of the upper layers of the bedrock have been scraped away. And so they've kind of exposed some of the astrobleeds that might otherwise be more obscured under the top layers of rock. And you'll notice that a lot of them do have lakes in them, and here you can very clearly see the circularity. And this is probably the inner part of the crater. There may have been a raised rim around here. Chubb Crater, northern Quebec, also about 2 miles in diameter, and it's an almost perfectly circular lake. This is Flynn Creek structure in Tennessee, which is kind of in our backyard, and this is probably one of the 34th parallel chain of craters, which we're going to look at and talk about in detail, because right across from east to west in the mid-central region of the United States, there's an interesting array of craters and crypto explosion structures that are almost aligned in a pattern. Some of them are proven to be impact. Now, this is the Flynn Creek structure, and this is just a digital elevation model, but very clearly the central uplift peak shows up. The rim is highly distorted, probably because of tectonic processes, because it's a very old, about 360 million years old. 2.2 miles in diameter, 180 megatons or 12,000 Hiroshima-sized bombs. Goat Paddock in Western Australia. Imprecisely dated, but less than 50 million years old. Now we're up to 3 miles in diameter. Explosive energy about 500 megatons. So we're getting up into some serious energy here now. 500 megaton explosion, we could consider that a state killer. An object like that striking the center of Texas is going to be pretty much leave most of Texas depopulated in the aftermath. Gow Creek Crater, Saskatchewan, 3 miles in diameter. This remnant of the central uplift is an island. Notice how the rim has been so obscured and eroded. Well, for two reasons for that. One, the glaciation itself, and then the rapid melting of the glacier and very vigorous meltwater currents also contributing to further extreme erosion. But the feature is still there, and it can actually be roughly dated, but it's less than 250 million years old. So, Pilot Crater, Northwest Territories, again, we're looking at Canada, 3.6 miles in diameter, explosive energy, over 1,000 megatons now, 1,060 megatons. And this is based upon a simple formula that only gives you approximately a ballpark idea of the energies, and it's basically a formula that's derived from known impacts and nuclear explosion energy released, craters produced, etc., to come up with a simple ratio between crater size and impact energies. But of course, there's a lot of variability in there, depending on the nature of the impactor, its velocity, the nature of the target material, and so on. So this is only just a rough approximation, but it does give you the idea. It gets you in the ballpark. Decaturville, Missouri, diameter 4 miles. That puts us up there again in that 1,000 plus megatons. The Decaturville, Missouri structure is also one of these 34th parallel crater chain that we're going to look at in more detail. Brad and I have actually visited several of those. I think even 3 of them, of the 9 or 10 of them. Crooked Creek, Missouri. This is another one that could be possibly related to this crater chain. It's 4.34 miles in diameter. Check this out, 1,792 megatons. So that's 120,000 Hiroshima bombs, all exploding at once. So we're getting up to some pretty significant energies. Another one, Couture, Quebec, Canada, 5 miles in diameter. At 5 miles now, we're up to 2,800 megatons. Let's move on, because this is the Gash, I don't know, Kazakhstan, approximately 5 million years old, 5 miles. So here's 2,800 megatons again. We'll keep going. Shoemaker, Australia, named after Eugene Shoemaker, who was studying this particular crater when he was killed in a bizarre accident in the outback of Australia. And I don't have the size of this, so let's see, I might have it. No, don't have it. So, but it doesn't matter. La Moyniere, Quebec, 400 plus or minus 50 million years, 5 miles in diameter, 2,820 megatons. Keep going. This is Upheaval Dome, Utah, less than 65 million years old, 6 miles in diameter, explosive energy. Now we're up to about 6,000 megatons. Remember I said that the peak of the Cold War, the total nuclear arsenals of the U.S. and the Soviet Union was 10, maybe 12,000 megatons. That was considered to be pretty much enough to destroy the world if it was all unleashed in a nuclear
scenario.
exchange, right? So Brad and I actually visited this one. Pretty impressive because it's an astrobleme that was undoubtedly buried and has had the top layers of rock stripped away to expose this thing that was, at one time buried beneath the surface of the land. And you see remnants of the old land surface around it in the rim. Look at this central uplift here. So this would be a really cool expedition. In fact, we would add this to the list in one of our undoubtedly future expeditions into the Colorado Plateau and Canyonlands area. Because this is in it's in Canyonlands, right, Brad?
Yeah, that's what I was going to add there. That's the Green River right up at the top. So that is
Yeah.
within the Canyonlands National Park in Utah, southern Utah.
Right. Sweet. Okay. Eagle Butte. This one's hard to see, but I put in a circle. Again, a lot of these are really obscure, and from the ground, you wouldn't even know they're there. So this is more like an astrobleme rather than a crater, because the scar is still there. And then you do the studies, and you find all the impact proxy material, or you find shocked quartz, or you find brecciated rock, which is broken rock, or you might find some melt glass. Many of the different various ways that craters are identified and confirmed. So check this out, 6 miles, 5,300 megatons. Asumtwi in Africa, 6.5 miles, over 7,000 megatons. Now Deep Bay, Saskatchewan, diameter 7.2 miles. Notice 9,950 megatons. So we're now getting up close to the total
That's a lot of
megatonnage
caffeine, yeah.
in the arsenals of the superpowers.
Maybe 125. You could check the label.
Which,
If you
thankfully, never
Google
got
it, pre-workout
unleashed in an
explosion.
all-out thermonuclear war, or we would probably not be having this congenial conversation right now. So, as you can see here, yeah, now we're getting up in the scale. This thing is, like it says, 7.2 miles in diameter. There's one in Brazil, also about 7.2
a
miles
liter
in
of
diameter,
coffee a
so the
day.
energies would have been equivalent. Jamanshin, Kazakhstan. This is young, less than 1 million years old, 8.7 miles. Notice here, 18,900 megatons. So now we have exceeded, and this thing, you can see it, it's right in here. Let's see, I might have it. No, I don't. But so now we're well beyond the total megatonnage of the entire nuclear arsenals.
So less than 1 million years ago,
Less than
there
a
was an
million.
event there that released more than the entire megatons of the Cold War arsenal. That's
All being exploded at once.
in the same place.
Yes.
Kazakhstan. In Kazakhstan.
In Kazakhstan. Yes, so you can see that would have been a pretty significant event. So it'd be interesting to look and see if there's any evidence of, extreme sudden climate change in this area, any mass extinction events, any biotic turnovers, which I haven't done, but of course it'd be interesting to look, because I would think that an 18,900 megaton explosion would have to have some kind of substantial effect that would leave residuals that could be studied today. Wells Creek, Tennessee. We also visited this one, and there is a there's a quarry we didn't get into, but there's a quarry. I think didn't we learn in the Central Uplift, Brad? We met the gentleman who had property adjacent to the roadway into the quarry. Was Wells Creek, wasn't it?
I don't think it was right in the central uplift.
Oh, okay.
I think
But
that's
we
the
did-
Tennessee River coming across there right at the top.
Yeah. So we didn't get in there. So that's probably worth a return trip at some time. That would be really interesting to get into that quarry. We did get into the quarry and took a tour of the quarry in the Kentland impact structure in Indiana, and that was really interesting, especially
You're talking
because you could really see the uplifted rocks and the very prominent and impressive shatter cones.
Oh, yeah.
A quarry or a mine?
A quarry,
Okay.
like a surface open pit quarry that's basically, extracting rock and gravel and things.
Yeah. Okay.
Spider Crater, 8 miles, energy 14,710 megatons. And here we go, Texas, Sierra Madera. That's a big one, 8 miles in diameter. Less than 100 million. How much less? I don't know. Maybe since I did this is an old program I did. I'm probably going back 12, 15 years ago. But there's maybe a lot of updated information that could be incorporated into this. But at this point, again, it's not so much the exact specifics, but at least to get kind of a general idea, a general comprehension of it.
I've driven through that one.
You have driven through that, huh?
Yes, and there is mining stuff at the central uplift. You can see all the equipment.
Ooh, interesting. I wonder if they could be contacted and we could go in it, because that's what we did. We contacted the quarry owners, or maybe we just drove on in and asked them if they would, and they were happy to give us a tour. We all put on our hard hats and down we went.
Yeah, that would be great.
Oh yeah.
They can be contacted. Just don't be trespassing on the property.
Ames, Oklahoma. Look at there, 10 miles in diameter. Some of these, of course, are just terrain modeled because they don't really show up too clearly from the surface. But again, a lot of research is ongoing, and I haven't been able to keep up with the most, up-to-date information on all of this. 10 miles in diameter is now 29,800, so we're close to 30,000 megatons. So now, this object here, explosion, we're getting, in the range of 3 times the entire nuclear arsenal. Arunga, Chad. This one I've always thought was quite interesting. 10.2 miles, 36,600 megatons. That's 2.4 million Hiroshima bombs going off at once. This astroballoon is part of a multiple impact event. Looks like that there's another right up here. You can see it in the upper right-hand corner. And then above that, there appears to be even a third impact scar. So this could have been an object that was coming in fragmented, probably an early fragmentation, and in the sense that it hadn't had much time for the parts, the 3 objects, if they were in fact that they were originally one object, for them to become separated very far. I've never really known how to pronounce How would you say this, Kyle?
Yeah, I think you had it right.
Yeah, Russia. Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Getting up there, Gosses Bluff, Australia, 14 miles in diameter. And here you see a central uplift range, which I think is interesting. And Reese, Germany, 14.4 miles, less than 15 million years old. So that puts it back early Pliocene. I heard a sound. Hot and Astroblane, Northwest Territories, 7.9 million. We'll just skim through these. Notice you're up to 20 miles here in diameter. Here, explosive energy, 200,000 megatons. Now we're getting into a serious global event with the ones that are following. 20 miles. So we're looking, here we go, Shoemaker. Approximately 20 miles, less than 5 million years.
Only 5 million?
Yes, which is interesting because notice I've mentioned before the Hemphillian extinction that was about 5 million years ago. I said that, if you look at the late Pleistocene extinction and then you go back in time to find an equivalent extinction level event, you're back at the Hemphillian, as it's called, and that's usually dated at about 5 million years. Is there a connection? I don't know. Maybe it's just a coincidence, but maybe there is a connection. 17.5 miles, 200,000 megatons, and then we get to Clearwater Lakes. This one's always been fascinating to me. This is like a tandem or a dual impact. Two objects, are they simultaneous in impact time, or are they separated in time? I don't know the answer to that. I think most of the assumptions are that it was like a twin object that they impacted simultaneous. There may be new studies on it showing that were not exactly simultaneous. I don't know. But notice here, West Crater over here, which has a central uplift ring, is 19.2 miles in diameter, and the Eastern Crater is 13.2. The combined explosive energy, 400,000 megatons.
So that's like the size of the Hiawatha right there, that 19.2 miles.
Yeah. Now, we are now looking at certainly global scale event here. You know, maybe not enough to cause the kind of mass extinction we saw at the KT or Permian-Triassic boundaries, but certainly enough to have global ramifications. Carswell, Saskatchewan, 23.5 miles, over 600,000 megatons. Here's one in Araguanha, Brazil, 25 miles in diameter. Karakul in Tajikistan, again, notice here, 5 million years old. So is it possible we're looking at a bombardment period? 28 miles in diameter. So again, here's two major craters on different sides of the Earth coinciding roughly with a mass extinction level event. Are they connected? I don't know, because I would have to really go in and get a very accurate chronology in order to try to tie these together. But what we're seeing here within the broad parameters, it certainly opens that possibility that we had a period, and they may have not occurred at the same time, but you know, the thing is just, you know, if you have one blow that incapacitates a large section of the planetary biosphere, and before it can fully recover, you have another one or several more. You see, it may not be just one punch that takes it down. It may be several, you see. Siljan, Sweden, 31.2 miles. Look at that explosive energy. Now we're looking at 1,640,000 megatons. Now, again, global event, but very old. Ackerman, Australia, again, very old, but global. 34 miles. You don't have an explosion that unleashes 1,800,000 megatons without having global consequences. Charlevoix, Quebec, 34 miles in diameter. Beaverhead.
Randall,
Yes.
you're looking at these ultra large scale asteroids, and you keep saying global consequences. Give us an idea what those global consequences would be for something like this.
Well, you'd have darkening of the skies. You'd probably have intense acid rain. You'd have, large-scale regional biomass burning. You'd probably have seismic consequences and perhaps volcanic consequences, because, this is going to even the Tunguska event caused, detectable changes in Earth's magnetic field that lasted for hours, right? I mean, we're really just at the beginning of understanding how these things are going to affect. But yeah, certainly it's going to affect the Earth's geomagnetic field. It's probably going to strip away the ozone layer, which allows a lot more cosmic radiation to come in, and which could produce mutational episodes. I mean, there's all kinds of things that could happen. Now, obviously, in the immediate vicinity, it's going to wipe everything out. It's going to sterilize that section of the planet. In other areas, the effects will be less severe, but there will certainly be consequences. You can't have, like it says here, a 2,666,000 megaton explosion without there being global consequences.
Are they extinction level events?
Well, okay, now when we're getting up to Manicouagan, look at here. Yes, I think now we're getting an extinction level events. Now, can we correlate? There has been some attempt to correlate Manicouagan, I think, with the Jurassic extinction event, but I think at this point the dating is not strong enough to show a definite correlation. But even without a definite correlation, my thought is that an event like this, that could produce a 50-plus mile diameter crater, could have effects that would take millennia to play out. I mean, it could cause instabilities in the biosphere, in the lithosphere, you know, even in the internal areas of the core. You know, the idea of what happens. We didn't talk about this episode, but we'll talk about it coming up. The possible Yellowstone hotspot being a result of an impact. That by striking the Earth and causing a very deep event, you're releasing the magma from down deep into the lithosphere that is now rising up in the plume to the surface. David Alt has done some work on that, and we'll get into that, especially when we come around to setting up the context for the Great Pacific Northwest mega flood events, which will be coming up. Manicouagan, as you can see, over 7 million megatons. So obviously an event like this is going to destroy everything. Now, an event like this would probably, let's say if it had, you know, happened in the western United States, would pretty much wipe out an area the size of the entire western United States. You'd have fallback debris that, if you had forests, would ignite secondary fires. That's part of it. The amount of dust and soot and stuff injected into the atmosphere is going to be, I mean, we know just from the eruption of Pinatubo that, you know, that amount of dust entered into the atmosphere has global climatic effects. So clearly there would have to be climatic effects, you know, undoubtedly cooling.
Yeah, the cooling, and then of course you'd have crop failure and habitat loss and all of the above. And so people, you know, you could have bottlenecks in many different, if not full extinctions.
And a bottleneck might not show up. See, that's the thing about the late Pleistocene, like particularly amongst humans, because if you're, you know, you may reduce the human population by 90%. But if that other 10% that survives is pretty much genetically diversified, you may not catch a bottleneck, you know, if you're not looking for it. Chesapeake Bay asterobleme, this is 56 miles in diameter. This is the one that created the pectite field that shows up in Georgia. So we're going to wrap this part up. Here's of course, the famous, this is again buried under nearly half a kilometer of limestone. But what's under there is this thing, is a multi-ring structure with a central uplift. Its estimated explosive energy is 300 million megatons. And of course, this is the extinction level event and impact associated with the rapid disappearance of the dinosaurs at the end of the Cretaceous. And then you have the Sudbury, Ontario, 155 miles in diameter, you know, 340 million megatons. Again, we're talking about a global event. The Vredefort structure in South Africa, 187 miles in diameter. So these are huge events, and thankfully they were a long time ago. But, you know, we might be talking here about a different class of events that Brad mentioned earlier, that if we look at it, say, a Tunguska type event. Now, if one of those happened over a densely populated urban area today, you're talking about instantaneously 1 million casualties. Okay, so that would be global event, and certainly in the sense that it would have global economic repercussions. You know, it wouldn't necessarily, you know, if it happened, let's say, over the eastern seaboard, it's not going to have consequences, ecological or climatological consequences too much for, say, somebody in Europe. But if you instantly wipe out an entire city the size of Washington, D.C. or New York, and you kill 1 million people and perhaps leave another 2 or 3 million people really seriously injured, yeah, I mean, that's going to have all kinds of consequences, social and economic. But here's what we're going to get at, and here's what we're going to see, particularly when we come back to talking about the Jungner Dryas, and the idea that if you're only limited to crater counting, you may not really be looking at the full broad picture of the kinds of things that would threaten human civilization. Because we are finding that there's evidence for what we could say is multiple simultaneous Tunguska events. In other words, Tunguska was one perhaps piece of probably spalled off of Comet Encke. Enki was probably spalled off of a much bigger object that might have been 50 to 100 miles in diameter that came into the inner solar system and began this ping pong between Jupiter and the sun, and during that process begins to disintegrate. Now, is it possible that Earth encountered the byproducts of that disintegration more than once? Well, certainly it is, because the Earth crosses that stream twice each year, right? So what we have to begin looking at, and this is what Chandra Wickramasinghe has addressed, Fred Hoyle, Victor Klube, William Napier, William Asher, all of these guys, what they're looking at is the dangers posed by a multiple Tunguska type event, where you might, what if you had a dozen Tunguska objects coming in? Or 100? What would 100? Well, now we're looking at an event that would be on the scale of a thermonuclear war. 100 Tunguskas, my God, that would be, you start contemplating the consequences of that, and they would be profound. Probably not enough to cause a mass extinction event that somebody 100,000 or a million years from now could come along and document. But certainly the consequences for the stability of modern civilization would be severely tested. Even maybe to the point where civilization itself would collapse. And see, what these guys are looking at is amassing evidence that makes that a very realistic scenario. See, so it may be that just our crater counting doesn't really give us the full picture, because that is a specific class of objects. You got 100 Tunguskas coming in, and they're exploding in the atmosphere because, let's say, they're between 30 meters and 100 meters in diameter. Well, you're going to have some very serious surface consequences, but you're not going to have craters produced, per se. All right, so we'll keep going here. We've seen some of this, so I'm not going to dwell on this. This is Upheaval Dome in Utah, Manicouagan, KT boundary. We've seen all that. Okay, so now we've got the map of confirmed and probable impact structures and astrobleeds. This is really what it looked like a decade and a half ago. We've added to it. Now, again, what I want people to really realize and contemplate is that all of these impacts, virtually all of them are on land. There's a few, yes, we're discovering that there are a few of them on the ocean floor. But again, for every one that you see on land, there should be 3 to 4 that have struck the ocean. So we need to have a more extended conversation about the consequences of oceanic impacts. And we will.
Modern science is rediscovering what our ancient ancestors knew. Periodically, planet Earth is overcome by sweeping catastrophic events that completely remodel the landscape of the world, reset the global ecological clock, and disrupt humankind's efforts to build a sustainable civilization. The forces of nature that trigger such events are still operational and will remain so despite our refusal to acknowledge them. But whether we accept it or not, we are inextricably a part of a cosmic ecosystem. And our fate is tied to phenomena which, for the time being, is beyond our ability to successfully respond. This can change, but only with a major change in our priorities as a civilization. The process begins with education. Please join us and participate remotely, as the Cosmic Summit will be live streamed to the world via howto.com.
Welcome back to Uncharted X. This is Ben, and I hope you are all well. In this video, we're going back to Egypt. Shocking, I know. To investigate some rarely seen and remarkable features of the ancient granite quarry at Aswan in Upper Egypt. In this part of the quarry, normally off-limits to tourists, there is evidence for something truly enormous having been removed. A single stone block that rivals, if not exceeds, the dimensions of the famous unfinished obelisk, a 1,200-ton monolith that is still in place and is the main attraction at the site. Not only that, however, but in this off-limits area, painted on the walls, is evidence that suggests that this colossal extraction might have been done long before the great dynastic Egyptian civilization ever began. I hope you'll join me as we explore these fascinating aspects of the ancient granite quarry, and just how they challenge our understanding of history. The Aswan Quarry is only one of many like it in the region, but it's the only one open to tourism. It's a must-see location for anyone visiting Egypt. When you arrive at the site and you buy your ticket, the first thing that happens is you are crowded into a hotbox of a room and shown a 20-minute video, in which it's explained to you how everything here was achieved with nothing more than dolerite pounding stones, time, and human effort. The Aswan Quarry is the only tourist site in Egypt I know of that makes it mandatory for visitors to sit down and have what they're going to see explained to them in this way. And it can generate some giggling from those who have looked into the evidence here beyond a superficial level. The video you're shown primarily focuses on the unfinished obelisk and how it was carved via pounding stones, therefore explaining the infamous scoop marks that are visible everywhere around it. Not covered in the video is the fact that there were multiple methods of stone quarrying used here. One method is the classic wedge and chisel approach, which leaves behind a characteristic signature that looks like a dashed line in the stone. Indentations into the stone are chiseled in a line, then wedges of wood are hammered into them. The wood is watered, which forces it to expand, putting pressure on the stone. Then flint wedges, or in later periods iron wedges, are hammered down, with the goal of forcing the stone to split along the wedge line and leaving what looks like a dashed line behind. You can find the signature of this technique all over the stone and monuments of ancient Egypt, and it was a method used for many thousands of years, right up until recent times, in fact. It was even used on the granite of the incredible casing stones of the Middle Pyramid at Giza.
That's why they want to quarry it, so they can make use of the flat surface. So they want the flat surface. Right. Yeah. Because they can't make it.
That's why you find lots of roads. This will be the pieces that are collected from wood. They're going to be thin and thick and down here. So we're actually aiming for this. They will manually target and then they will mill stone out of it.
Yeah.
This is most of what they. It's not just during the Greco-Roman and the Coptic time when we used to make mill stones, but there is also, as I told you, from the 12th around 2000 BC.
This was done by the workmen of Ramses II of the 19th dynasty, who was quarrying the granite of the casing stones to take slabs for use on other sites. Why quarry raw stone for yourself when you can just take finished pieces from far older monuments? Interestingly, a geologist who was travelling with us in Egypt made an astute observation that connects the wedge and chisel method to the stone nub phenomenon found around the world. On many megalithic sites, we can find both large and small stone nubs, or protrusions, coming out of the blocks, and it's a mystery that's been explored by many researchers. If your quarrying method is wedge and chisel, with the aim to split stone blocks, then it's incredibly unlikely that you'll end up with a nub as a result. Wedge and chisel quarrying either splits the stone in a mostly straight line, or it fails, and only a chunk of stone is removed. A good example of a failure is seen here, when an attempt to split a slab from the huge megalithic granite blocks of the Osirion failed, leaving only the corner removed. You just don't get nubs from wedge and chisel quarrying, and it's a seemingly obvious connection when you think about it, but it's not one that I've made before.
Yeah. So if someone comes and says, well look, I can cut these because I can split rock, right? So if I'm going to split rock, am I messing up your video?
No, no.
If I'm going to split it, yeah, I can split a rock like that by using quarries and, you know, the chisels and along the holes, right? So if I split a rock like that, I can't leave a nub. You cannot leave a nub.
If you split a rock?
You cannot leave the nub. It's flat. Follow me?
Well, yes, if it's so these aren't split, is what you're saying.
Or if they did split, then hone down, then put it.
Then put in a nub, yeah. No, you're right, yeah. Yeah, there's some other quarrying technique in play here, not splitting.
There's at least what?
That's okay. Yeah, I'm following you.
Yeah. So if anybody says, no, I can split, you're right, you're telling me how you
make a nub. Yeah, you know what?
That'll make people think.
Yeah.
So, how could the nubs have been formed? Many people speculate that they represent a sort of unfinished work. The stone wasn't fully dressed and the nubs were intended to be removed. They can't have been created in the first place by the commonly used wedge and chisel approach, so either they're a deliberate feature carved into the stone for some sort of purpose or function, or they're the result of a very different method of quarrying. It's probably no surprise that these nubs are also closely associated with the infamous scoop mark form of quarrying. They're often found in the same area and even on the same stones. For example, if you examine the granite casing stones of the third pyramid at Giza, you will find both scoop marks and nubs. When it comes to the scoop marks, the best examples are found at the granite quarry in Aswan and represent one of the enduring mysteries of this site. I've explored this phenomena in depth in a previous video. I'd recommend checking that out if you haven't seen it, as the scoop marks are very important to the central topic for this video. It's worth mentioning that there is a third quarrying technique in evidence at Aswan, beyond the scoop marks and the wedge and chisel approach. That of traditional chiseling, something done in the later periods of ancient Egypt, likely with long iron chisels that were hammered into the stone. Just keep on hammering away until you separate the desired block from the bedrock, and you can see the signature it leaves here. Despite all three of these techniques being visible at Aswan, the scoop marks are the only quarrying method that is discussed in the indoctrination video all tourists are forced to watch. As we know, the explanation given is that of pounding stones, a theory with more holes in it than a colander.
This is how they made them, apparently.
Watch out, you're breaking.
Perhaps this is because the scoop marks are associated closely with the most massive and impressive features in the quarry, like the 1,200-ton unfinished obelisk, and the claim that huge blocks like this can be extracted with nothing more than manpower, time, and a bunch of round rocks needs an authoritarian tone if it is to be believed. After all, there's nothing really mysterious about the other quarrying techniques. They have all been in use for thousands of years, and variations on them are still used today. They were evidently also used at Aswan for cutting decidedly smaller stone blocks, with no evidence to suggest that they played a role in extracting the obelisk. They were used to try and carve it up into smaller pieces, presumably much later on. It's an interesting observation. The dashed lines of wedge and chisel quarrying isn't used to create very large pieces in the first place, but it seems to have been frequently used to try and carve them up into smaller pieces later on. This is part of the mystery of the scoop marks, as the orthodox explanation for them makes it easily the most primitive technique, yet it's something that we only ever see on the most impressive or the most massive and megalithic of ancient achievements. During that same indoctrination video, the narrator also attempts to explain just how gigantic single pieces of stone were moved from the site. The video describes a harbour area of the quarry in which boats were docked and huge stones were loaded. This harbour area is what we're going to talk about today. It's normally forbidden to enter this area. I don't know why, but it's found directly outside of the entry buildings. Normally, you're shepherded around to the left, to the walkway that leads up to the unfinished obelisk. But on one occasion, our group just kind of walked down into the harbour area to take a look. Eventually, we were chased out, but not before we had a chance to examine the walls and features here, and it was fascinating. Walking into the harbour area, you are confronted with what seems to be a large trench, and gazing at the walls here, it's clear that this area has been quarried with the scoop technique. And not only that, but it appears that a truly monumental piece of granite was removed. The outline of the piece is shown by the indented tops of the scoops, the ridges at the tops of the walls, probably the remnants of narrow trenches cut down into the stone, that then extended underneath the block at the bottom. Look at the dimensions of the walls at the end here where we're standing. The piece here, to my eye, seems larger in both width and height than that of the unfinished obelisk. When we examine the famous obelisk, its width can be established by the distance between the trenches on either side. At its widest part, its base, it measures 4.2 metres across. The width tapers down or narrows as the trenches go towards the top. Assuming that they wanted to remove a square section of stone, the trenches are only about 2/3 as deep as they need to be. Given obelisks generally have square sections, we can safely assume that its intended maximum height at its base as being around 4.2 metres also. Returning to the walls of the harbour, the height of the block that was removed here seems to have a larger cross-section than that of the obelisk. Even accounting for trenches and undercutting, to my eye this was a bigger piece, and it was, obviously, successfully extracted. A huge monolith by any description. We only have access to most of one wall of the original trench that ran down the length of the piece, and a small part of the opposite wall at the base of the block. The majority of the stone that would have made up the other side of the excavation has all been quarried away over time. Looking at the ground level, where the block would have been undercut, there are odd notches and channels that are carved at regular intervals. To me, these are very interesting, as we're getting a look at what must have been some of the final stages of the quarrying process before extracting such an enormous stone. What was the purpose for these shapes? Perhaps the channels were needed for part of the mechanism used to lift the piece up out of its trench. This part of the extraction, lifting the block out of its trench, is a not inconsequential task, and when we consider the unfinished obelisk, this task is conspicuously left unaddressed by the standard model explanation. I've always wondered, exactly how would a Bronze Age culture manage to lift a 1,200-ton piece up out of its bed, which is on an angle, raise it at least 5 meters or more into the air, and then maneuver it over the rocky and uneven ground of the quarry? In my own research, as well as in several comments and emails, I've heard it proposed that perhaps the dolerite stone balls, which were found in large numbers on this site, the vast majority of them broken in half, might well have been used as primitive bearings beneath the large stone blocks as they were being released from the bedrock. The weight of blocks like the obelisk is certainly a better explanation for how you might split a dolerite sphere in half. Trying to split one through pounding alone was tested by British engineer Reginald Engelbeck, who excavated the site in 1922, and who found it to be basically impossible. The only way he managed to break one was by repeatedly hurling it down onto stone from a great height, eventually cracking a piece off. Returning to the so-called harbour area, we also get a sense for the length of the monolith, and again observe that it was truly massive, perhaps as long or even longer than the unfinished obelisk. We don't really know its true length, as the one long wall has been truncated by subsequent quarrying. My good friend and guide Yusuf Aywan made an interesting observation here, that the wall markings show some tapering down, which might suggest the block was intended for use as an obelisk. As previously mentioned, we can see the same tapering effect on the unfinished obelisk.
This one massive body obelisk. Yeah. Okay, then this look, then remember, this will be the part that runs under the obelisk. So the obelisk was probably, you see this one here? This is where we would be walking. And this is the other part that moved under the obelisk. So it would be somewhere around between here and under the other side. So it's like 5 meters wide or something. Here?
And it could be, this could be the base of a statue, one of those giant statues. Could be a block from one of the giant statues.
Maybe, but if I look at the sloping angle here, looks like this is the base and this is an obelisk.
Yeah, oh true.
Maybe, according to the official story, at least they mentioned that obelisks are known as the old beginnings, so they exist. Because I was actually talking about that online and some who came and said like, oh, obelisks were exclusively new kingdoms. Nah, go back to the books and keep reading.
The size of the block, at least to me, seems like it might have been possibly intended for use as a statue. We know, without doubt, that gigantic single-piece granite statues weighing well in excess of 1,000 tons existed during ancient Egypt. Some of them were of a figure seated on a throne, and others were even standing. For example, here are the remnants of a single-piece composite quartzite statue found at Karnak. Just look at the immense size and proportions of the features. The workers here have reassembled the pieces from the shoulder down to the hand, and with a straight arm, we know that this was almost certainly a standing statue, and what a sight it must have been. Even 1,000 miles away from Aswan, to the north in the Nile Delta at the site of Tanis, Flinders Petrie found the remnants of a gigantic single-piece pink granite statue, stone that was sourced from Aswan. How was the original block for this statue moved 1,000 miles or 1,600 kilometers? I've covered this artifact and the topic of colossal statues in some depth in previous videos, and the links to them can be found below in the description. Regardless of whether this block in the quarry was destined to be an obelisk, a statue, or something else, it seems possible, if not probable, that it weighed in at considerably more than the unfinished obelisk's 1,200 tons. There are other aspects of this area that challenge the mainstream explanation. Firstly, this is supposed to be a harbour, where boats are docked in order to receive cargoes of stone. Presumably then, this block was removed before the area could be used as a harbour. Where was it taken, and how was it loaded? Where was it loaded? Of course, these questions are built on the assumption that this work was all done by the dynastic Egyptians. But what if it wasn't? What if this giant stone block was, instead, extracted in periods long before the dynastic Egyptians even started their own quarrying operations here? If this space was already here, it certainly makes it more convenient and plausible that it was a harbour. There's other evidence here that points to a great antiquity for this work, and it's drawn on the walls that were created after this huge stone was removed. Painted on the walls of the trench and faded by time are primitive depictions of what appear to be ostriches. Egypt, being located in the northern extreme of the African continent, certainly would have known of this species. Further down the wall remain the very faint traces in blue of what seem to be dolphins, which were known to inhabit the Nile River in the past. They're tough to see. I've done what I can to contrast them out in these images, but they are there. These primitive paintings aren't ignored by the standard model. Indeed, an attempt to explain them is given in the compulsory video. You're told that they were made by the workers in the quarry, presumably with all the spare time and energy they had after an 8 to 12 hour shift of pounding away with rocks. We know that the dynastic Egyptians used the quarry, there's no doubt of that. And not only do we see the wedge and chisel method that they certainly used, but there are also inscriptions carved into the stone in the typical dynastic style, and very different to the ostrich paintings. The assertion that the painted ostriches were made by the workers has really nothing behind it beyond convenience, and the desire to fit this evidence into the mainstream timeline. This isn't really how regular archaeology works. Archaeologists all over the world date and relate all sorts of artifacts by comparing them to others with known provenance, objects found in burials or the like that can have their age established through techniques like radiocarbon dating or even written records. Comparing and categorizing the particular style of artwork or artifacts is also a long-established method for dating. Take pottery, for example. Many academic textbooks have been written categorizing the various styles and forms of pottery and how they relate to different periods of ancient civilizations. This is an established archaeological method used at sites from China to South America to Egypt. This same method applies equally well to artwork and even writing. Styles of artwork can relate to specific periods. This technique is even used with the Egyptian hieroglyphic language itself. Some symbols, like that for water, changed in form over time, and thus the characters themselves can be used to determine if something was written in the Old, Middle, or New Kingdom. For whatever reason, however, this technique is conspicuously absent in the case of these paintings in the quarry. Perhaps because doing so would posit a fairly inconvenient conclusion, because these drawings of ostriches and dolphins were done in a style of artwork found to be prevalent in pre-dynastic times. For many thousands of years before the dynastic civilization ever started, primitive Mesolithic people were making artwork on objects like ostrich eggs or pottery, and there's many examples to be found. Just compare the paintings on the wall at Aswan to those made on this egg. They're almost identical, and it would be a brave scholar to make the case that they're not of the same form. This egg, and many more examples like it, come from established pre-dynastic burials and sites, going back thousands of years prior to the establishment of the dynastic Egyptian civilization. Entire textbooks have been written discussing pre-dynastic artwork in Egypt, a category that also includes the infamous, at least 7,000-year-old ostrich egg that appears to depict the pyramids next to the River Nile. If the paintings in the quarry are in fact pre-dynastic, this raises some significant challenges to the standard timeline for the quarry. Stating the blindingly obvious, the scooping and quarrying work had to have been done before the pre-dynastic paintings were ever made. How long before? We have no way of telling. It could have been thousands of years, we just don't know. Now we're on some ground that sits far outside of mainstream Egyptology, but you can begin to see the house of cards made by the assumptions in the standard model. The paintings had to be done by the workers, despite the evidence to the contrary, because the quarrying had to be done by the dynastic Egyptians, who therefore had to have created the scoop marks with nothing more than pounding stones, because we know that's all they had. It's like a chain made up of nothing but weak links and entirely unproven assertions. I've explained the mystery and significance of the scoop marks in a previous video, and I don't need to cover the same ground here, so check that one out if you're interested. The scoop marks have been puzzled over and theorised about by engineers and stoneworkers for more than 100 years now, professionals who know their crafts, and it's safe to say that very little credence is given to the whole pounding stone explanation. I, as well as many other people, including qualified engineers, think that the scoop marks are much better explained if we open our minds to the possibility of some unknown advanced form of technology. From this point, we can start to construct a new timeline, a new set of assumptions, but one's grounded in facts and evidence. I don't believe the dynastic Egyptians were using forms of advanced technology. They were a Bronze Age culture. They used copper and flint. They used wedge and chisel quarry, none of which explain the scoop marks. Associated with the scoop marks is the unfinished obelisk, and not for a minute do I think that a Bronze Age culture who didn't use the pulley or capstan, nor had access to strong metals, had the capability to lift and move single-piece stones of this size. Again, this is a topic I've explored in an earlier video on quarrying and logistics, so check that out if you need more explanation. So, if the dynastic Egyptians didn't make the scoop marks, and they weren't trying to remove 1,000-ton blocks of stone, and if the paintings in the quarry are from primitive pre-dynastic people, as the evidence suggests, who was responsible for the enormous works in the quarry? Could we be looking at the evidence for an alternative timeline, a longer one, involving a lost ancient civilization with advanced capabilities? There are multiple quarrying methods in evidence at the site, and it was certainly one used by the dynastic Egyptians. Are we looking at two separate industries here? on two very different timelines? Could the huge unfinished obelisk and the extraction from the harbour already have been ancient work, even for the dynastic Egyptians? If you've watched my scoop mark video discussing the obelisk, you'll know that it was buried in up to 7 meters of debris until the 1920s when excavations began, including some very large pieces that had to be broken up into 4 or more chunks in order to be
Yo,
removed.
what's up, Christian? How you doing, man? I'm just about to sign
Similarly,
off, my dude.
in early
Just
surveys
about to
of
sign
the
off,
site
buddy.
made
I'm going
before it was
to
excavated,
sign off, raid
the
somebody.
harbour
Later,
area
man.
doesn't even show up. It was entirely buried in chip heaps and quarry rubble. Even if this was a truly ancient source of stone, we know the dynastic Egyptians continued quarrying operations here. As discussed, we can find lots of wedge and chisel marks made in the higher areas of the quarry and on the cliffs and sheer faces of previous extractions. Also, we know that none of the wedge and chisel signatures suggest that this method was used to remove stones of the same order of magnitude as those that were extracted via scooping. The massive single-piece blocks that were clearly extracted from here weren't just lying around on the surface either. You need to dig deeply into a granite outcrop to depths of 10, 11 meters or more to find solid enough granite for that purpose. You can still find many test holes at Aswan, which were dug using the scoop method that were likely used to determine the quality of the granite. Surface granite might have been suitable for smaller pieces, but would not yield the huge solid chunks like those needed for statues, obelisks, columns, or even the massive boxes like those found in the Serapina. So it's probably time for some speculation. What do I think was going on here? For the sake of argument, let's assume that there was an advanced, vastly ancient civilization in this area, who had access to technology capable of quarrying, extracting, and moving blocks of immense size, using techniques that left the scoop mark signature.